tonight. Do you hear me?
Yes. Do you want me to, I just turned the recording on.
Sure. Let's go ahead and start. So thanks for joining us. I'm Bill Lapini, Superintendent in SAU 21, and I have with me on this panel tonight people who you know if you've joined us before for these sessions, but if you haven't, David Hobbs, who's our Assistant Superintendent, Caroline Arakilian, who is our Executive Director of Student Services, Matt Ferrara, who is our Business Administrator, two other members of the leadership team of the task force are also with us, Jason Saltmarsh, who's the Director of Technology for Winnacunnet High School, and Donna Couture, who's our ELO coordinator, and the person who makes all of this happen, who's taught me everything I know about Zoom and lots of other platforms, Rhonda Evans. So thanks for joining us, and I see some people are still coming in, but we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to try to go till about 7:30 and try to take you through a little bit about the return to school plan and some pieces of that, some updated information on surveys that we have out there, which is still out there until tomorrow afternoon. And then just sort of what comes next, I guess, is what we'll try to do. So let me sort of lay that piece out first. We did a forum with our employees today after briefing the joint board on the plan to date last Thursday. We'll meet with principals to debrief these sessions on Thursday of this week. And then we hope to go back to the joint board with at least recommendations for where we are now, because I think anyone will tell you in this particular process that we expect things to change. Even once we've adopted a plan, we know there will be changes throughout until we get to the beginning of the school year, whatever that is going to look like. We will use tonight, so I'm going to go through a little bit of a presentation, and then we'll use the Q&A function. If you have questions that you'd like to pose on pieces of that or other issues related to the return to school, we're happy to try to answer them. As I told our employees today, there may be more than an occasional answer of "we don't know," and that's just because of the evolving nature of this situation. But we'll try to give you our best thinking to date and sort of walk you through how that might evolve in the coming weeks. So let me start by just making one announcement sort of out of the joint board meeting last week, and we'll be getting this calendar out as we finalize it next week with the joint board. So we have modified the calendar for the beginning of the school year. Many districts have. We will now have our teachers start on August 26th. They will be in for professional learning through Thursday of the week prior to Labor Day. And our students will now start, whatever start means, on Tuesday, September 8th. And you'll be getting a calendar that will spell that out sometime after Tuesday. We have it in draft form. We'll take it to the joint board next week, and then we'll make sure you have it. But you should write that date in. Tuesday, September 8th is the starting date for whatever school looks like. So our current options that we've been testing through that survey and talking with our joint board about are a remote option for students and an in-person option. That in-person option assumed for now, as we discussed with them last week, a 5-day-a-week model at all grade levels, at all schools. I've said a number of times that 5-day-a-week model is dependent upon us. First of all, it's always been our goal to reopen 5 days a week safely for all of our students and staff. And the 5-day-a-week model assumes that we can do that safely. That is, maintain appropriate social distancing and all of those particular safety requirements we know that with our student body as it stood, let's say at the end of last school year, that would not be possible. So we're continuing to work on a model where there are enough students who choose a remote option that we can open safely with all of the students who wish to come for an in-person model. And some of that will depend on what we see in terms of what I'll still could consider to be preliminary data from this survey. So I'm going to actually show you some pieces of the plan that we discussed last week and go through that. And so here it is. So, and again, this is a working document right now. Some people have asked us on our call earlier today, when is this available? This will be available as it goes to board for a final consideration. So we will, that'll be a public document then and be available to you then. Let me just talk about some pieces of this. I didn't want to do that. Give me 1 second. Okay. So as you know, we've done surveys earlier in the year. We did a staff survey and we did a parent guardian survey. We found in this that the overwhelming response from parents was they wanted to see their students return to school. We've worked toward that. We had a higher number, about twice the percentage of staff members that were concerned about returning to school, 20% to 10% among parents about their students. And one really important piece for us in terms of there are so many different pieces of this juggling act. But one I want to point out to you that you may not think about often is this consistency with other SAUs. We asked our employees, is it important to you that our models are similar, that we're doing something similar to the districts in which you live? That becomes particularly important if people are looking at hybrid models in those districts or something that would have younger children, elementary age children at home. And you can see that about 38% of our employees, and we had a large response, said, yes, it's very important. And one thing I want to point out is that unfortunately, we're not seeing that throughout the southeastern part of the state. We're not seeing consistent models from SAU, from district to district to district. And that is somewhat problematic for all of us as we're looking at our own models and making sure our teachers are available to teach in person come the beginning of the school year. So the one thing I do want to say, we had some interesting responses to this survey from parents on transportation. So we've broken that down even further on the current survey. But I want to say to you about the current survey the following. So we are right around 1,800 individual student responses. That's out of 2,400 students, so that's a good response. Again, we have one more day left. And we are in the 15% range in terms of remote being an option, preferred option. Again, at least on this survey here. We have another 18% or so who've said, I'm considering the remote option. And they've given us some great questions in order to consider. Some people asking why we didn't consider hybrid. I hope that I've been able to explain that. That is that we started out looking at a 5-day-a-week model, knowing that if we couldn't bring everyone in safely, we might have to look at a hybrid model in some of our schools or all of our schools, and that's still on the table. So those numbers are significant in terms of the remote option. You should know that we've also been working with our employees around their ability to come back to school. That is, do they have certain issues that might prevent them from being able to come back to school? Do they have health issues? Do they have childcare issues? All of those kinds of things which might be problematic and might make them better candidates to teach in a remote environment for us. So we're trying to achieve that match. That's been part of what we've been trying to do with this survey and a letter to our staff members over the last week or so. The transportation one is an interesting one. We've found that so far of that 67% or so of people who are interested in in-person option, that over 50% of them are telling us that they would not utilize our transportation. And that will be an important consideration to us as we consider how to appropriately social distance, how to maintain all those safety protocols on our buses. So it's very valuable information. Again, never meant to be the final sort of decision for parents. I've talked to a number of parents who've said, what if I change my mind? What if I, as I get more information about your remote model, excuse me, if I feel differently? Perfectly acceptable. Said in the letter, we were going to try to make sure people had more information by around the end of August so that they could make those decisions. So, in case you haven't been with us before and heard, this has been a process for us involving quite a few people. I think we're right around 100 people involved in either our task force work or our various working groups. Again, I just can't express how appreciative we are to them for all the time they've devoted, both during the end of the school year and then into the summer, in helping us with this planning. So we've described, again, to this point, the Remote Learning Academy idea, which we're offering right now, is something for people to consider K through 12, pre-K to 12. We've begun to describe that in a little bit more detail. Dr. Hobbs has laid out in a document that accompanies this document sort of mock schedules for what scheduling could look like at the primary level, at the intermediate level, at the middle level, and then at the high school level. I want to say a couple things about that, and again, I'll invite our panelists to jump in here at any point. One is that we think we learned a lot from the experience that happened in the spring. This particular remote environment would have 5 days a week of live interaction between educators and students. It would be scheduled because we know at some of our schools we had better success where people actually had schedules for students. We believe there would be some opportunity for students and families who are interested and able to have face-to-face situations for certain aspects of their program. That is, come into the school building. We believe that our remote teachers will actually teach from in the school building, that they will be able to deliver content to students in a remote situation from there, so that it's much easier for them to get books and materials available for kids and families to pick up when those kinds of things are necessary. So that's just a little bit of the description, a schedule, 5 days a week of sort of live instruction, all of those kinds of pieces that we think that we've learned from what happened in our remote situation in the spring. And then face-to-face, we've described here as a model that consists of full-day experiences for 5 days a week, and we continue to vet that. My team members will, I think, back me up on this. Every moment of the day, we're vetting some piece of this plan against that criteria of, can we do it safely? Can we do it in a way where we can keep students and staff safe within the criteria that have been laid out? So we continue to look at that face-to-face model. And we know at all of that we have to be ready to move to remote instruction in its entirety should we experience another wave of the virus or the possibility of rolling closures. Those kinds of things that might make us change models in the middle of a semester. And one of the great things about the in-person model spelled out here is that Dr. Hobbs is working with curriculum coordinators, principals at each of the buildings to make sure that every course has some sort of an online or remote component to it, whether it's how homework is shared, assignments are shared, so that quickly students would actually know that environment and be able to move to that environment should we need to go remote. So,
Bill,
yeah.
Quick clarification on the Remote Learning Academy.
Thank you.
The working notion right now, if you're visualizing this, is really two different ecosystems. And we got at that after a lot of deliberation. But as we start looking at scheduling and making sure that all classes are covered and, offering robust curriculum in the remote learning academy. Some of those walls and those barriers between face-to-face and remote learning might have to come down. In other words, we might have to have a teacher from the building teach an online class or vice versa. The other thing that I wanted to make sure people were aware of, and we were transparent about, is one of our assumptions with the Remote Learning Academy is extent of collaboration across the SAU. So for example, if we have a grade band in a given grade for Remote Learning Academy, that might be taught by a teacher outside your particular district. And so I just want to make sure that those are all on the table as transparent assumptions that we have.
Thanks, David.
Yep.
So I want to skip now in this planning process to general building protocol and go through some of these pieces. We have made a proposal that masks will be required for students and staff when indoors. Masks may be removed outside of the 6-foot social distancing. And for now, students and staff would be asked to bring their own masks, but school districts will have, and we've said disposable here, although we've had offers of some cloth masks and all that could be made available for our students and staff as well. We know that, and we're working with the principals, and some of what we're not going to be able to answer tonight is building specific, because different people are approaching sort of this framework in different ways. But we know that we have to ensure mask breaks be built in throughout the daily schedule, and we've been talking as if those would be at least hourly, that there would be mask breaks for everyone. We would use outdoor space. Some of our principals, I've been on individual calls with them in the last 2 days, and they are looking creatively at this idea of finding ways to create outdoor space. As one parent said to me the other day, yeah, that works when it isn't raining or probably until the end of October. That's fair, but at least it works till then. So we're looking at those kind of spaces and whether we can create opportunities for teachers to have classes outdoors where we know there's a lot more flexibility with respect to safety protocols around the virus. We're looking at building schedules. And one of the key words for us is cohort. That is the creation of smaller groups of students so that we can, so that we know who's together and when, in case we do have an outbreak of the virus, and in our work with DHHS, so that we can help pinpoint situations more carefully than look at the entirety of the school. So what do cohorts look like? Well, if you're elementary parents, you know that it tends to be a class, right, or a grade level at worst. At the middle level, it tends to be a class or grade levels. They tend to move together. The high school is much more difficult to create cohorts, and what we've been exploring there is the using the schedule, modifying the schedule so that students have less classes in a given day, possibly for longer periods of time, so that at least we have that much control over their schedule. And they might actually be on some sort of an A, B schedule with some of their classes one day and other classes the next day in order to cut down on those kinds of things. We've talked about, obviously you've heard from other districts, or if you're reading about what schools are doing, people are looking at students remaining in the room and faculty members moving. They're looking at what does movement in hallways. They're looking at minimizing student travel. They're looking at drop off and pickup times and varying those in a way to keep kids from congregating together, which is what kids do. All of those kinds of things. We don't have specifics on those yet, but we will as we continue to work with principals. So we're looking at lowering numbers in classrooms. We're looking at where we have opportunity to open windows. We're looking at the 3-foot distance with masks. Some other rooms, we're looking at 6-foot distance. I've used as an example that we have classrooms at least at the high school, probably in other buildings where there aren't windows. We have to be much more strict about the 6-foot guidance there, where we don't have an ability to open a window and bring in fresh air. And again, some of those things are still being worked on, but we've looked at the number of students that might be in a given room, given the spacing that we need to have and given our ability to open windows, those kinds of things. We've talked specifically, and I don't know of other districts doing this, but about heat and humidity. and the ability to hold school on days like today, when students and staff would be wearing masks. And what we've proposed here is a heat index measure where we would not have school on certain days in heat and humidity. Again, depending on the building, some of our buildings have a certain type of air exchange system, Lincoln Ackerman, for example, where it almost functions as air conditioning. It is not air conditioning, I need to continue to remind people, but it's a cooler environment. And so we might not need to do such an action there, but at other buildings we would. And so we've talked about about having the equivalent of what we would have called a snow day, but having those instead be remote days so that we don't end up having to make them up, because students can continue to engage in work from their classrooms. We are looking at, in terms of school attendance, we're looking to you for a real partnership here. We intend to have some sort of an attestation form or an application that includes that attestation form. And whether it's daily or every so many days, having students, having staff, parents answer questions about their students in terms of health and those kinds of things to figure out whether they should be coming to school that day. I have sat in too many meetings over the last 2 or 3 weeks with nurses or other medical people and talking about all of the what ifs. But the what ifs all start with people can't come to school when they're sick. They all start there, every conversation. And so we're emphasizing that to our employees, and we need to emphasize that to you, that is really an important part of our being able to keep schools open and functioning, is people paying attention to how they feel to those elements of the attestation form and seeing their physician when need be. So there's a whole set of protocols. I'm sure we'll get into it with some of the questions around what happens when staff members or students become ill. Our nurses are still working on particular pieces of this in terms of that, almost a flow chart of what happens when. And so that will be finished and published, made available for parents to see, all parts of that as we get closer to the beginning of the school year. And one important part that we spoke with the joint board about last week, if we don't have a nurse in a school for a particular day, we will not be able to open that school. We have increased the amount of pay that we use for substitute nurses. We actually have continued a conversation off last week about whether we need to bring on almost a roving nurse. There are financial implications to that, obviously, but given that we just simply in this environment can't open a school when we don't have nurses, is very important to us, and it's very important that you know that we won't do that. So just some other pieces. There will be, for at least the first trimester, there will be no student field trips. We're going to encourage our educators to incorporate virtual experiences. And one of the things that happened in the spring is there are a lot more virtual experiences available for classes to use, but we won't have student field trips. We won't be taking students off campus. We won't allow use of our buildings by outside groups. We have lots of people asking us what that means in terms of rec departments and those kinds of things, and we need to work out those details. But this is all in that spirit of cohort control, so we won't be doing that. We will not support any outside professional development, including our own SAU-wide committees by our teachers. All of our meetings that go on, for example, if the 4th grade teachers are all getting together for a meeting, that will be done remotely. I said to staff today, I will not be attending superintendent meetings at the state level. I will be doing that. If I participate, it will be all remote, all in the interest of us keeping control over our cohorts as best we can. Access to our buildings will be limited primarily to students, educators, and staff. Parents and other visitors can only enter the facility on an as-needed basis with an appointment. We recognize that there may be some need for IEP meetings or parent conferences, but the vast majority of those meetings will be held remotely, except where there aren't the means available for a parent, then we'll have to schedule it differently. We're taking a look at drop-off and pickup protocols at each of the buildings, and principals will be communicating some things around those kinds of things again, in order to make sure that we don't have any more congregating than necessary. We'll be publishing cleaning and disinfecting protocols so parents can see what we're doing and how often we're doing it, so that all of that is transparent to you. That'll all be published as we get closer to the start of the year. And we will have hand sanitizer, hand washing stations available for students and staff. I will say here, we've been talking to a number of medical advisors, and we continue a conversation with them about temperature checks because some of them are encouraging us to do that. We know that there aren't very many districts that I know of that have actually looked at that step, but that's still a conversation for us. Lunch will be a grab and go for breakfast and lunch, our meal program. While we may use some of our cafeterias, we will have social distancing and we will have caps on numbers of people who can be in those spaces. Some of our lunches will take place in classrooms, or hopefully for those first few months in outside spaces where students can eat. Substitute teachers is a big challenge for us. We're looking at making sure we have enough, first of all, and second of all, making sure that we control them as part of the cohort, right? That they're part of that cohort, and so we're not adding any more people to the cohort than necessary. And I mentioned the nurse piece that's in that section as well. In transportation, I mentioned this already, although we're gonna work with our companies around their cleaning protocol. Again, those will be public so that anybody can see what's actually happening on a daily basis or in between run basis or whatever it is with respect to transportation and cleaning. And it looks like from some of our surveys that we may have a decreased use of our transportation. We are also looking at ways to, particularly at the high school level, to increase the number of students who don't use transportation, who come in other means. And Mr. McGowan, I've been talking with him about what some of those steps might be. Special education, listen, whether we go to remote or whether a student chooses the remote academy, we know that there's need within a student's IEP for some in-person experiences. And we know that we have to make sure those can happen, right? Again, even for someone who's in the remote academy, or even if we end up going to remote because of a closure again. And we're committed to making sure those happen. We've gotten tabletop plexiglass to make sure that we can have BCBAs, evaluators, OT-PTs, that they can engage in those kinds of experiences with students without the need for a mask, because that's the only way to conduct that testing or whatever. And the same thing is true with respect to specialized transportation. As I said earlier about our general transportation, they will have protocols for cleaning. Those will be available for people to see. In terms of technology, we learned a lot. We are very focused in on our use of PowerSchool, Google Meet and Google Classroom, Zoom, and Seesaw. Those platforms in terms of our in-person experiences, in terms of our remote academy, or in terms of a return to some sort of remote if we need be. And the last thing I want to mention that you see here is one word that has no text underneath it, but it's just to remind me to make sure I mention it, is athletics. So at this point, we're probably at a point where we will be recommending that there won't be middle level athletic programs this fall. For the fall, we'll make a decision with respect to the winter at some later time. The NHIAA has not, right now, has left it in the hands of individual school districts, whether there will be varsity athletics. I know from our conversations with other superintendents, particularly those on the Seacoast, that there are some of those school districts that are zeroing in now on a recommendation to their boards that they not participate in varsity sports this fall. We're not there. That's not where we are right now, but we will continue to monitor what our neighbors do and whether we think we can safely transport students to these places to play games, and whether those sports are something that we can engage in safely with other schools. So a lot more to be done on that. But again, I can tell you that there are Seacoast schools that I think you'll be hearing an announcement within the next week or so that they are not participating in sports at all, or in some cases in sports in the more contact sports. That is, they're going to limit themselves to cross-country, golf, those kinds of sports, and not participate in the others. So a lot more to be written in the coming weeks on athletics. In all pieces of that, we're expecting that the NHIAA will delay the start of the season. We've heard that within the last few days, and we anticipate that's going to happen very soon. So what I'm going to do is ask each of my colleagues, and I'm just noting that there are already 23 questions. so I'll ask if anybody wants to add anything or any pieces to that. And then I think we'll go to questions. Again, please put your questions in the Q&A section. Don't raise your hand. Put your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll spend the remainder of our time, about an hour, going through what you've put there. Okay? David, Caroline, Matt, Jason, Donna. Anybody want to add anything here?
I'll jump in, sure. Really, you did a great job overviewing kind of the whole plan. I think one of the things that needs to be said in a kind of a community forum is just a note on faculty and face-to-face teaching. We're making these plans under the assumption that we have the faculty in order to carry that out. And we're going to have to augment or change as that availability changes, both short-term and long-term. And what I mean by short-term and long-term is long-term, we know a teacher is going to be out for an extended period of time, or short-term, like Dr. Lupini mentioned, on a given day, if we don't have a nurse, we're going to have to be able to pivot really quickly and say, hey, look, we're not having school. So, just to put cards on the table, those are some of the realities of what we're looking at in terms of scheduling.
Anyone else?
Not at this point, thanks.
Okay. Jason, you look like you want to say something, or is it just me?
Well, no, I just wanted to make it clear that technology obviously is going to be a component of whatever solution we have in place. All three of these have that in common. So in thinking about that, we're going to be focused on equity for all of our learners. And we've learned that simplicity is something that's important, to have some common platforms so as not to cause so much confusion at home with both parents and students. And finally, that we are looking at ways that we can make sure that teachers are able to have a synchronous live component to their instruction daily, which will make our remote learning academy look very different than what you might have experienced during last spring when we went to an emergency situation and moved to remote learning.
Great, thanks. I'm going to need 1 second because
I think Donna's got some.
While you're
Donna, go ahead while I look for what Rhonda is pointing me towards, some questions that are in the that were emailed to her. Please go ahead.
Okay. Well, while you're doing that, I'll quickly say that one of the things that hasn't escaped me throughout all of this planning is that our students, when they're engaged in normal school, definitely participate in learning experiences or opportunities where they connect to outside organizations, outside professionals, higher ed admissions counselors, for example, things of that nature. And where those restrictions have to be put in place and we can't welcome visitors in our school and limit how our students are connecting with those individuals on their own, it remains a priority for us to make sure that those rich learning experiences continue for our students, no matter what school will look like in the fall. And so just putting it out there that we are finding new and innovative ways for our students to still maintain those connections. So whether it's for career planning or post-secondary planning or just enriching their academic experience within a classroom curriculum. We're still paying attention to how we can make that happen in a remote setting.
Thanks. So I'm going to do something that my colleagues here know I don't do very. I have two different documents. Your questions in the Q&A and some questions people have emailed in. And this is going to be scary, but I'm going to try to toggle between those two. So everybody hold on. So I will try to do that and see how we do here. And I'm trying to look for matches and whatever, because I see a lot of similar kinds of questions. And if I paraphrase your question and don't get it right because I'm trying to match it up with a bigger theme and direct it to one of the panelists, just forgive me, or type something in and say, yeah, you needed to go back to that. So for mask breaks, does this present itself as a recess for elementary school students? Will there be time for outdoor play during the school day? Yes, possibly to both of those. Although if recess doesn't naturally match up with the sort of maximum amounts of time that we'd want to see for students having to wear masks, that would have to be scheduled in more often. So yes, one of the discussions we've had with principals is maximizing the use of outdoor time in a bunch of ways here. So what will the protocol, and I see this in the others too, and Matt and Caroline, I'm going to direct this to you because I know you've been doing most of the work on this. What will the protocol be if a student staff member tests positive? This person asks, will it be the same as the lice policy? I know the answer to that. The answer is no. So can you just sort of walk through what we know as we're continuing to refine those protocol?
Yeah, so if a staff member or student tests positive, that would be handled by DHHS at the state level. At which point they have various protocol as far as getting tested and then self-quarantining for a period of time, depending on the circumstances. Now, at that point, they would conduct contact tracing within the school and outside of the school as well, where they would identify any students or staff members who are within 6 feet of the infected person for a period of 10 minutes or longer. So that at that point, it starts, the scope starts to widen, and that those individuals would then be go through the DHHS protocol as far as identifying whether they need to be tested or self-quarantine. And I will note that that DHHS does determine a period of contagiousness for each infected person. So as you can tell, this can create a ripple effect within a setting such as a school, particularly with the current turnaround for testing. So there is a backlog at a national level for test results coming back. I mean, we're seeing as long as 7 to 10 days. Now, this creates problems both with getting our students and staff back in the school building, and then also potentially creating a lag time with potential additional infections across the school. So, we've heard from various sources that they do not anticipate that testing turnaround to improve dramatically based on anticipated increased need once school starts in session and what's going on across the country, unless there is some sort of provision in some type of federal stimulus package that that would increase that testing capability. But really, we won't be allowing any students or staff back into the school building until they get clearance from DHHS. So that's the bottom line.
Caroline, you want to add anything to that?
Sure, thank you. Just that, these protocols and guidelines that DHHS directs people to follow, and what we hear about and what we keep researching. They do change, if not daily, weekly. And, as Matt was explaining, they will be in touch with people as far as what they need to do. And with the contact tracing, as it stands now, it's, who have you been in touch with for longer than 10 minutes within 6 feet in the past 48 hours. So, and then from there, they determine the quarantine, they determine who they should contact and who should stay home. So this is not something that parents would expect from the school. We take privacy very seriously, and this is not something that we would, that would come from the school. We wouldn't announce anyone who is out for quarantine or for any illness for that matter. DHHS would be in touch with people and direct them accordingly.
And Caroline, there's a question here about our information sharing between nurses. And because we have kids from same families in different schools. So can you speak to that? Yes.
So while the nurses meet very regularly, they set up protocols, and they have their own reporting system in the school nurse information database, but that's private per district. The only time that information is shared is when a student changes district. So when a student goes from 8th grade to 9th grade, that's when the information, and that's true of the rest of their file also. The file follows the student. So their medical information goes from 8th grade to the next school. So in this case, it's when it if you chose a different school for your child, then we would have permission from you to share that 8th grade information to a private school or charter school or whatever. But as far as in the meetings and informally, we're not talking about specific names and students, and certainly not talking about specific cases across nurses, across districts.
All right. And there is a question here just on this same theme about what, this kind of question we were asked earlier today. At what point do all students stay home? And that's really a conversation depending on the circumstances, depending on what we're being told by DHHS as they would investigate particular complaints, particular situations, look at contact tracing, and would really be advising us. It's one of the reasons for our focus so much on these cohorts, is that the attempt is really to limit the potential to a cohort instead of the entire school. So it's a hard question to answer. It would really depend on what the circumstances were. I want to go back to the others. So look at me moving back to the other list. Would Remote Learning Academy be cross SAU? Yes, Dr. Hobbs answered that earlier. Yes. So first graders from across the SAU could be a cohort. Yes, we actually anticipate that is the way this will need to happen again, because we're trying to match teachers up with cohorts. So with students being properly distanced at their desk, are they required to wear a mask? Yes, according to the advice we're being given. And again, we're going to take our protocol back again and talk with our nurses, our medical team, or people who are advising us. But yes, that is our current understanding, because indoors that may be different for outdoors. Would class loads be decreased to allow for these mask breaks? Well, we actually think, going back to the beginning of this, that depending on the number of students who go remote, we anticipate that our classes will be reduced in size. And so, yes, but that happens in terms of us being able to keep our safety protocol in place. What happens if your child gets a cold? Do they have to quarantine for 14 days? Are they remote learning at that point? Caroline, should I give this to you? Because I know this was a conversation with nurses in terms of students being sent home, those kinds of things the other day.
Sure. So this is of course a really important and relevant topic for parents, because students have other things going on. Students have other symptoms for other reasons. The issue is that, when a student comes into the nurse's office, the nurse has to make a decision based on symptoms. So the nurse is not like the doctor who's doing an allergy test, or they do not provide diagnoses. They're not assessing at that time. What they're doing is they're determining if the student can stay in school. So if a student is coming in and exhibiting some, of course my cat comes up right at this moment. If a student comes into the school nurse's office with some of these symptoms that are on the COVID-19 list, the school nurse will have to make them, use the most caution in that moment and say that the student needs to go home. So they're on calls now with DHHS every week with Dr. Chan, and Dr. Chan is advising that if students have these symptoms, the students will need to go home. But we're in the process of creating a flow chart and information for parents, so you can determine in the mornings if your child should go to school. There's a whole flow chart about that will be published, and we'll be sharing that with our families. And then there'll also be a protocol for teachers when to make an appointment for the student to go to the nurse. And then there'll also be a protocol for the nurse how to allow the student into the office, when to determine to send the student home, or when the student can go back to class. But unfortunately, even for students who have these symptoms for other reasons, the nurse is not in a position where they can make the determination that it is definitively not COVID-19. So in order to be as cautious as possible, they would err on the side of caution and send a student home.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
You want me to get on the remote learning piece of that?
Please.
I think it's a through line, so I think it'll help. The second part of that is, are they remote learning at that point?
Yeah.
Obviously, we've stated that every face-to-face class is going to have a remote component to it. That's going to be asynchronous. It's going to be more passive, but it's just going to happen in case we have to jump to remote. So, to answer your question, it would be really an academic decision for the student. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to staying with the cohort and the group of students that they've initiated at the beginning of the year. And then there's the other logistical side, which is there an equivalent remote learning academy class that's going on that they could jump into? So those kind of decisions are going to have to be more individual academic decisions, but we haven't drawn any clear delineated lines around that yet.
Thanks. Mr. Ferraro, there's a question here about filters. Will we have HEPA filters installed? It just jumped on me in any of the classrooms.
Yeah, so airflow and circulation, as Dr. Lupini mentioned earlier, is really important when we're looking at an indoor school component. Every one of our schools has different HVAC systems, and even within a school, they have disparate systems. So all of our facilities managers are working with our HVAC contractors, and they're evaluating our systems to add the appropriate high-grade air filters. I believe they're MERV, as well as looking at automating our HVAC system, and really with the intent to increase the airflow, the circulation, and refresh throughout the school. Additionally, we're looking to flush the system with clean air multiple times during the school day, and then doing an extended flush, after school when it's unoccupied. Similarly, we are looking at replacing our normal vacuum filters with HEPA grade filters. And really all of these initiatives really align with our goal to utilize that fresh air, whether that's opening windows, whether it's having outdoor classes, and just to maximize fresh air for our students and our staff.
Thank you. There's a question, there's a theme I see running through some questions about, when we get down to it, will people be able to choose a remote option? And the answer is yes. You've given us an indication on this survey, many of you. We will come back to you, but it will also be open to other people who believe, after hearing more, that is the appropriate place for their child, given everything that they've heard. There's a question about the 3-foot versus 6-foot. So this comes from, you're right, not from the original CDC guidance, but from the guidance from the American Association for Pediatrics. It's also now in almost every state set of recommendations regarding social distancing and calls for the use of masks and those kinds of things. And we're working off of that. We obviously would love to maintain 6 foot in all of our spaces. We can't do that and open right now before we look at these data regarding parent choice. But that's our goal, is to get there. I spoke to temperature checks. It's still on the table for us to look at. There are just a lot of questions about and I would just refer you back to the answer that Matt and Caroline just gave to positive tests, because there are questions here about siblings in another class, and a similar question to the one earlier about a child who is asthmatic and has allergies but is not sick. Caroline, do you want to try a little bit more on that one? Because again, I know there was this conversation with the nurses the other day about students who have a recurring condition, migraines or whatever, and that's documented, and how that might be different than a student who just exhibits a headache on a particular day.
So what they heard from Dr. Chan last week was that school nurses are not in a position to discern what the cause of the symptoms are. That being said, the School Nurse Association is expected to release some guidelines and protocols for school nurses this week, early as Friday. So that's something that we're looking forward to. And also hearing Dr. Chan's call, because, as we approach the winter months, and many children in New Hampshire in the winter have a sniffly nose, this is just not sustainable. So we're really looking forward to that list and that guidance from DHHS to make sure that we're all doing the same thing across all of our schools.
This is the easiest question of the day or night. If we know somebody using our own community resources, can we see if there are people out there who are RNs who want to join our substitute nurse list? Yes, we're willing to ask. And yes, if you know anyone, please send them to us, because we'd love to talk with them. Dr. Hobbs, there's a student who's in the in-school program and might want to get sick or whatever, might want to move over to remote academy. Can you just talk about those two different environments and how that might all happen?
Yeah, I mean, there's the short answer, the short-term answer, and the long-term answer. If I read that correctly, this would be more of like a daily or weekly thing, back and forth. And in that case, I would say that's really not plausible. We would have to build the remote learning academy sections and do attendance and all that kind of stuff as a separate entity from the face-to-face. So short-term, it's really not a viable solution for us or anyone else. And then the second answer is the more long-term question. And I think, ultimately, it's really hard to give a broad answer on that, but ultimately it's technically possible. We would need to make sure that the needs lined up, make sure that the offerings lined up, and make sure that we gave credence to the classroom that we established and the culture that we established face-to-face in the beginning of the school year. And I'd also just like to put on the table, we want to be conscious of the section sizes that we're building in our remote academy. I mean, if we have to hop to remote, that's one thing, then section sizes work out. However, if we're talking about a small pocket of students and teachers, that's something we've just got to keep tabs on with respect to scheduling.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Here's a question which I know is coming your way, Dr. Erkilian. I had a very poor experience with remote learning regarding IEP last year. if it's a requirement this year, and it's not a requirement, I mean, it's an option available to you now, how can I be guaranteed that my child is being supported? Well, let me just give the overall, which is to say this, right? So we moved to an online model in 3 days last year, and certainly tweaked it throughout that period of time. We've had time to plan now. I think you saw some of that probably in the document earlier. In that what we've done is we've said we know that some of those face-to-face services need to still take place. So that's one pretty large enhancement to the model to make sure those things are in place for students. And there are others in terms of the use of EAs and those kinds of things. Dr. Arkelian, do you want to expand on some of those pieces?
Sure, thanks. So absolutely, I would definitely piggyback on that comment as far as, we turned around remote learning in just a couple days, and at no time did we ever claim that, remote instruction was a replacement for face-to-face, particularly for students who have disabilities, who have learning challenges, for students who are the most involved, students who have the most significant disabilities. They need people. They need face-to-face time as much as safely can occur. So, while in the spring, we were on a closed, the state was shut down, the schools, businesses were shut down. We were truly staying separate so as to say as safe and distance as possible, because sometimes students with the most disabilities are also the most at risk of being medically fragile and having those other medical issues that even more warrant being separate. Going forward, we know a lot more now. So the plan for the fall, regardless of what happens, whether we're all in buildings, if we're in a hybrid model, if there's a second wave, whatever happens, we know now how to keep students safe. If we need to bring some students in for specialized instruction, for related services, and for other services, so that we can fulfill what's in the IEP with more fidelity. So students and families with IEPs, your directors and case managers will be reaching out to you to have those conversations over the next few months to determine what else can be put into your child's plan in the upcoming months and year. So we can make sure that your student has the progress that they may have missed in the spring. So it's a totally valid concern and something that we take very seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rhonda's just pointed me to some questions about sports, so I'll try this again now. So I'm not saying, we haven't taken a position on anything other than, quite frankly, one that appears to be very easy, and that's with respect to sports that occur at our middle schools or in the middle grades of our K-8s. We haven't found anyone in terms of the Seacoast that's actually going to conduct those, so we believe at this point we will be recommending that those not occur for the fall season. With respect to JV, freshman, and varsity, we know right now there's an ongoing conversation. There's a conversation with the New Hampshire NHIAA about whether there will be fall sports. There are some districts on the Seacoast, I want to say this as clear as I can again, that we know right now are looking at or leaning toward or ready to recommend to their school boards that they will not participate in NHIAA sports for the fall season. We are not there with respect to varsity, JV, or freshmen yet. We do suspect that the NHIA will delay the start of those seasons, and we'll have to pay attention to what people around us, other Division I schools, for example, are doing as we consider what recommendations we may make to the board if the NHIAA is not willing to, in my opinion, is not willing to do their job, which is to make those decisions at the statewide level. They've so far indicated that they're not interested in making a decision, and they've left it in the hands of superintendents and principals and school boards. And so right now, no action on those, which means for now, those sports are going to happen this fall. But it's something we'll have to pay very close attention to as we see what other schools and the NHIAA do. There's a question about alternative plans for specialized service like ABA, OT, PT, which cannot be implemented remotely. And yes, we said we are going to have a way to even if someone chose the remote academy, we'll have a way to put those in place in school, in person, so that families could come in and have their child come in and access those services. Let's see. What about Donna? Here's a question. What about internships, Donna?
Yay. Okay. So as you can imagine, any ELO that happens off campus is going to be a very difficult situation to contend with. So what we're at least saying right now is that any student who's interested in an internship or ELO like experience where they're looking at career options, there are plenty of alternatives to internships at this moment that we're exploring, and we're pretty confident that we can deliver. We're, as we speak, developing some online curriculum for career explorations. And believe it or not, since the spring, there are many industry partners in the state of New Hampshire and across the country who have reached out virtually to offer options. We have, for example, our hospitality sector partners across the state are offering virtual tours of larger facilities and culinary arts facilities. There's demonstrations by professional chefs and things of that nature that they're putting on their website. So the things are students, but we're going to try all we can to connect students as best we can if we can't do it in person. Sorry, my connection's a little bit unstable at the moment.
You're good, thank you. There's a question here, and I am skipping around a little bit. By the way, I had a sort of rule of thumb in the forums that we did earlier in the year, that if I was going through questions and the number was still getting away from me, that I wasn't doing a good job. I'm doing a really bad job tonight, because the more questions we answer, the larger that number gets. Again, we may go a little bit over, but we're going to go to 7:30, 7:45 tonight, and then figure out where we are with some of the questions. Let's see. Will Google Classroom tutorials be available for parents and for students? Jason, you might want to speak to whether it's in our remote academy or for students in their remote part of their classes, what kinds of tutorials and support have we had available, and are we planning to have available?
Yeah, so we had a pretty extensive resource page for students and for teachers during our initial foray into remote learning last year. But we know that we need to strengthen that with particular attention to parents who are trying to support their students at home and may be unfamiliar with the tools we use here at the school. And so we are developing, and we plan to release a site at each of the individual school websites that will be particularly geared towards supporting learners at home, which includes tutorials and basic methodologies for parents to follow along with. And we also obviously will respond to phone calls and emails and support you, when we can at the moment that you need it. But yes, we definitely recognize that that is a need, and we will address that going forward this year.
Great, thanks.
Just
Yeah,
real
Dave.
quickly on that. That relates to one of my working group's recommendations, which is just the consolidation of platforms. And I believe that came out of the technology group as well. Look, we don't want parents or teachers and students looking through 10 different platforms trying to find their assignment, or we don't want school by email. We want a single or a small conduit of platforms that students are collaborating on.
Okay, I'm going to go over to the ones that are online here now. Will masks be mandatory for all ages? Yes, as we're looking at the plan right now, they will be. We'll continue to discuss those with our medical advisors. But yes, as of the moment, they are mandatory pre-K through 12. Will VLAX be an option for the remote option? It is part of an option. We think that VLAX may be a good supplement for some courses that we're unable to offer as part of our remote offerings. So VLAX, sort of independent study experiences, ELO kinds of experiences like Donna described, all could be part of that remote experience. Will students be graded how will students be graded to make sure they're ready to move on to a new grade? I think they're asking remote if that's chosen. David, you want to answer that one?
So silver lining is we've done a lot of competency work in the last 2 years, and we're actually in a place where our entire curriculum is written out, codified, and actually printed out onto a spreadsheet. So we do understand the larger competencies and the underlying standards associated with every class that we offer in SAU 21, which is a huge step forward, both for diagnostics, so a teacher can understand where the students are, but also for reporting and communication with moms and dads. We want to be able to give you accurate picture and accurate measurement about specific skills and specific competencies that kids can live up to.
Okay, thank you. What will be done, or what will happen when people refuse to follow social distancing or mask rules? I've been asked this probably in every forum. People have to follow our mask rules or they can't be in school. People have to follow our social distancing guidelines or they can't be in school. Those are designed to keep people safe. If we can't guarantee that we can keep people safe, we're going to have to ask people to not be there as part of that experience. There's a comment here about, and I don't know the answer to this, and David, you may be the only one who does. It says we've done a lot of talking about wearing a mask, washing your hands. What do we do around kids in terms of healthy eating, exercise, building your immune system? What kinds of things are in, and where is it in our curriculum?
Yeah, so we have obviously the health and wellness curriculum is a K through 12 curriculum that we've got. The other thing, obviously, that we're really focusing on, especially post-COVID, is school reentry, right? Getting back into those habits, understanding not only physical health, but also social emotional health, sensitivity to others, socialization skills, and that's Caroline's wheelhouse. But we've dedicated an entire fifth of our task force to those kind of needs post-COVID. So I think we've at least identified the problem and defined some action steps around that.
Thanks. If it turns out students have to go to remote learning after returning to school, will laptops be provided? Yes, we're a one-to-one environment, and quite frankly, the days of us being one-to-one, but students not having access to take those devices home are over. I think that's, if we learned anything on March 13th, it's how quickly we could move to sending devices home with kids. And so, yes, they have a device. If a student, we think we answered this before, if a student chooses in person but feels a need to change, there are methods we believe we can set up for people to move to the remote academy. Art classes at the high school, there's a lot of questions here about UAs, whether they're at the high school or at the elementary level. We think things like band and chorus, probably more than art classes, are going to be challenging. We were lucky enough to have one of our teachers at the high school, one of our music teachers on the committee. He's been great at sharing with us resources from their professional association. He actually wrote a proposal for us that we were able to support in terms of running a band camp this fall with specific protocol in place. And so we're going to continue to work on those kinds of things to make sure that wherever possible, we can have those experiences in place. I don't know if there are particular challenges around art classes. I mean, masks, social distancing, those kinds of things. I may be missing something there, but I think within those regular guidelines, probably reduced numbers in those individual classes, we can run them. That is really moving on me. Okay, so I answered the one about people sick and what constitutes closure. I don't think there's one. It really depends on our interaction with DHHS off of what the particular set of facts are in front of us. If school doesn't open all 5 days for students, what's the plan for well, right now our plan is that they would open for 5 days. Will they have the option to go full week? So, you know, I don't know about individual districts and their hybrid models, but I've talked to some colleagues in the state, and they have, and Caroline, you probably know this more than I do. They have talked about that they're running a hybrid model, but they're running a more than hybrid model, more days a week for students, depending on what it says in their IEP. So I've actually talked with colleagues about those approaches. I know there are districts in the state of New Hampshire that are running those approaches. That is that, you know, I think you know, SAU 90 and some others are talking about a Monday, Tuesday, and then Thursday, Friday model in a hybrid. And I've seen those kind of conversations where, depending on what it says in a particular child's IEP, that child is in more than just Monday, Tuesday. Caroline, do you want to say a word about this?
I did hear that for, you know, so many districts are still working on this, so I hesitate to say, so just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But I did hear for SAU 16, so Exeter and surrounding towns, that they are, their elementary grades are coming in 5 days a week, but their high school are partial days, but students who receive services are coming in for full days, and they're not offering a remote option for services. Whereas we, you know, I think probably because we are a little bit smaller, we can be more flexible with that and say that, you know, we're working on this remote academy. If students are staying home, then we can continue with some telehealth sessions for that. But if, you know, if families choose remote learning, they can still come in for some services. And then there's the full in model or option, I should say, for students who have services. That's going to be an option for kids regardless of our plan. So for students who have the most services, we're committed to providing those in person as much as safely and as much as we can staff in person as possible.
Thanks. Two quick things. Someone asked me in an email, so now I'm watching a third source, right? In an email, what about the plan we just put up? That plan will be available in written form and electronically, probably on our website as we get to point of finalizing it as a recommendation to the board. So end of the week, beginning of next week, it will be there. And I'm happy to send out something that says the plan's now there. So you'll have access to that. There's a link off that plan. There were some good questions here about, you know, how much teacher interaction will remote students have on a daily basis. That plan actually includes sample schedules for different levels and really shows that interaction and the number of times that we're sort of forecasting that students will have access to their teachers. And there's a question here about what's a day in the life look like. Day in the life looks like those sample schedules. And again, that'll be available for you to see. Here's somebody that put 4 questions in one, so I really don't have 93 questions. I have like 98 questions, right? How would clubs work? Would they be allowed? I don't know. I think I said at the beginning there were going to be some things we were going to say we don't know to yet. We don't know that. How would a mask protocol work for, and this person said immunocompromised students? Yeah, we know there are students who, because of their individual needs, will not be able to wear a mask, and we are committed, because we're committed to the individual needs of all kids, to meet those kids at their needs. So there'll have to be a discussion about what that means for each of those students. How would transportation SST work for SST students? I don't know. I know that SST for juniors and seniors or other students who drive, because we had a meeting on Friday afternoon remotely, is going to free up additional parking for students to drive to SST. But there will also be transportation, although it will be appropriately socially distanced and all of those kinds of safety protocol in place for students to go to SST. It's probably in these questions somewhere. Someone's asked me a question about SST and remote. So if I choose remote academy, but my son or daughter was supposed to go to SST, will SST accommodate them? We had that conversation on Friday. I believe the answer is going to be yes, that they would be able to access their program remotely through SST. Let's see. Would students have to be tested before or during school? We will not be testing students. We don't have that capability set up. We are not. We won't be testing students. I answered the band things, I think. Let's see. Will the remote learning curriculum be as complete as the on-site version? The second question is, should we expect remote learners to be behind once school returns to normal? No. Will it be as complete as the on-site version? I think within our ability to piece together these different pieces, our own remote offerings, the use of VLAX, the use of independent learning experiences, the use for middle school and high school age students of ELO-like activities, I think yes, if you look at it, as Dr. Hobbs said earlier, in terms of allowing students to meet the competencies, yes, I think it will be complete. Seabrook has many more cases than other towns in the district. Would it be safe to have all students have the same guidelines? Salisbury and Amesbury are talking hybrid. I'm not sure the specifics of the question, but again, we're looking at those data in terms of the survey with respect to each individual community. And I hope I said it up front. We are seeing differences in the data at our different, in our different districts. So we are seeing data. It's going to be easier to do certain models in certain schools than others. Where does the school fall with respect to Winnicott and driving to school? Unrelated students, we won't allow it. Mr. McGowan and I've discussed, and I heard in the SST discussions, driving to school will be limited to people in one's own home. I think we've answered, unless somebody wants to add more to the quarantining questions around particular grades. I think if you go back, if you want to listen to this, and by the way, it's recorded, and listen to Mr. Ferrara and Dr. Arkelian on their answer with respect to testing and involvement of DHHS and those kinds of things. Yes, yes, I believe we've done this in the past regarding substitute teachers, but we're certainly willing to do it again if people are interested in being part of the cohort of our substitutes. Will students only be able to interact with kids in their cohort? Will the cohorts be randomly picked? Well, the cohorts are largely classes. And again, some of our schools are even going as far as looking at, you know, if you're in a middle school, for example, at Seabrook, and you have all of your UAs in your schedule, there's a conversation going on there and in other places with respect to, if you're in 7th grade, you might have art in all of those time slots in the first 9 weeks, and then have music in the second 9 weeks. Anything we can do to limit what that group of adults and that group of students look like in that cohort is what we're looking for. Dr. Hobbs, there's a question here about testing with respect to when we come back. Do you want to talk about our own individual sort of assessments, what we're being offered by the state, those kinds of things?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know where I can't read the question, but I'll just respond verbally.
Yep.
So obviously, all of our districts do have localized assessments to diagnose any gaps in learning. That's obviously more easily facilitated in a face-to-face environment. However, we do have a lot of programs that allow us to test locally, test students in a remote scenario. With respect to the state testing, they have required statewide assessments for ELA and math. Those are going to be what they call benchmark assessments. So they're short. They're real small diagnostic tests, half an hour at most. And those will, like I said, they'll be issued at grades 4 through 8. And then, of course, we have the SAT was required by the state at the high school level. They've given us 3 days, and they've given us an in-school option for the SAT. I have no idea how we're going to do that logistically, but we'll figure it out when we get there. But yeah, the testing protocols have been established.
Thanks. There's a question here about coaches included in the discussion with employees. If coaches have Winnicott or SAU emails, they were included. We included everybody who's in our email system. There were not students. We did not have students on that task force. That may be reasonably assumed to be a weakness in what we did with the task force, but we didn't. And I'm sorry, I just don't understand the comment about Winnicott leading on athletics. You know, the NHIAA, quite frankly, is there to provide us with guidance, and so we're looking and hoping we get it from them. We are talking to other Division I schools about what they're doing and the kinds of things that they're doing this fall. We are not requiring students to be tested before returning to school. I think Mr. Ferrara answered questions about HVAC systems. I'm just trying to pay attention to in the interest of time here. SAU 90 is going to AB days. That just jumped on me, sorry. Where kids are only going to school 2 days a week. Is WHS going this route as well? Not at this point. We are not looking at a hybrid model. Having children in 3 different schools, 2 different districts is hard. I hear you. I can't speak to that. You know, we knew about their model. I've known about the recommendation for some time, and that work didn't happen together this time. So David, do you want to, I know there's been a lot of talk about lockdown protocols, safety emergency protocols from the state level. Do you want to say a word about that?
It would help if I unmuted myself, right?
That would.
There has been a lot of talk around use of outdoor spaces. Obviously, we're not going to be able to have hardened tents or hardened outdoor classrooms, but we are establishing and expecting protocols around, if the class goes outside, they're going to need a cell phone, walkie-talkie. They're going to need to make sure that the parents can reach the kids at any given time, that communication piece. With respect to emergency planning and drills and all that, I'll try to keep it short. There are kind of 2 opposing views right now at the state level. One is that we need more drills, COVID-related drills. What do we do if we have a positive? That kind of thing, walkthroughs. The other side of that argument is we need fewer drills because by their very essence, drills would break up some of our cohort models and mix kids. So, to be determined is the answer. So I can't give any hard kind of decision on that, but I am expecting some augmentation of the safety and security protocols.
Thanks, David. David, do you want to, there's a bunch of questions here about grading processes and whether we're going back at the high school, what we're doing at different levels. Do you want to just take a couple minutes and talk about that?
Certainly, yeah. So, I think you said it earlier, Dr. Lupini, but I'll repeat it. The online learning that we were doing in the spring was emergency online learning. We really had 3 days to prepare for it. We understood that certain students were not going to get equitable experiences in this remote setting. Therefore, we had to augment the grading system in order to reflect that. Moving forward, whether we're in remote academy, face-to-face, or we morph into an online, if we have to jump remote at some point. The recommendation across the board from our committee has been make sure that we keep the rigor, the specificity, and the general expectations for grading assessment as similar as traditional as possible. And we intend to keep that given given the idea, given the notion that we're able to provide equitable experiences for our kids. We just don't want to increase that equity gap.
Thanks, David.
Yep.
I'm just looking at the time, and as I said, I think we're going to go another 20 minutes. We are obviously not going to get to all of this, but I'm trying to pick out themes here. So there is a very good question here about a child with an IEP and needing an FM system. I talked earlier about accommodations with respect to the child. Those accommodations might not be just limited to them. They might be also include their teacher and the type of mask that they might need for a particular child because of their needs. We've also talked about types of masks where you can see someone's mouth in terms of the teacher in elementary grades, whether reading is being taught, those kinds of things. So yes, all of those things are on the table in terms of the accommodations the kids may need to learn. Yes, we're gonna, there's a question here about kids and taking their Chromebooks home because of heat days, those kinds of things. Yes, again, I think we're very much trying to make sure that that's possible, whereas at some schools that never happened before March of last year. But we know that it will this year. Again, there's some questions here about students and teachers being tested. They will not be tested unless there is a reason, as has been described here in answers to a number of questions. So I want to be clear about something with the remote. It'll be a couple weeks until we know who may teach in the academy, because again, we're still going through a process with our employees in terms of them identifying their interest, them identifying accommodations they may need, those kinds of things that would make them candidates to do this. And so, you know, very quickly after that, we know we have to move to get those contacts set up, those courses set up, again, for parents who choose that option for their children, all of those schedules set up, those kinds of things. We have a lot of work to do in a very short order of time. Someone on here asks about the in-person model in more detail. It's in that, I think a lot of it's in that plan. That plan will be published as we take a plan to the board next week, and so that'll be available to you. Obviously, you'll be able to ask questions off that. This is as good a time as any for me to say, and boy, here's an overcommitment. So a number of people have written to me since the survey came out. I believe I have answered every one of those emails, and in fact, in a couple cases, made phone calls to talk to people when they wanted a conversation. In as much as I'm able to do that within a 24-hour day, I will continue to do that after tonight, after we go to the joint board, after we publish that plan, whatever we can do to try to help people make up their mind and accomplish that within a 24-hour day. I know hybrid is still on the table. Will parents have the option to say, yes, I want in person, but I want a few days a week, not all 5? No, we'll have models and we'll be able to help people within those models, but we aren't going to be able to offer all 3 models that we know right now. We've been asked about change. Let's see, and change will be available. Let's see. That's a good question about at the high school, would some electives or other classes only be held in person or online? It could be. We're not there yet. I mean, the most likely for that, it's a very good question. We've actually had this conversation. It's more likely when you have singleton kind of courses that we may not be able to offer them in all kinds of different forms. That's where we may use VLAX. That's where we may ask a teacher who's teaching in person to do a remote class as one of their assignments. So we're trying to be creative about that, but it'll really come down to who we have available to us. Bus seats for kids, we believe that they'll be socially distanced. It could be every other seat. It could be more. We believe that there'll be assigned seats. And we believe students will wear masks and that windows will be open. That's what we've seen with people who've run buses in particular during the summer. let's see. I can't answer as to how we will categorize quarantine days in terms of allowed absences. That'd be a great question for principals as we work more with them. Can we live stream classes? We will, right now that's not part of our plan. So also known in sort of our lingo as Room and Zoom. It's not part of what we've been talking about. There are an awful lot of complications with who in terms of other students can be seen in terms of those classes. There are just a lot of complications and we don't see that being part of our plan right now. We're looking right now for a commitment of 1 trimester to models, knowing that there may be people who have a need, as Dr. Hobbs described earlier, to work within that. Mr. Farrar laid out earlier classroom cleanings, which we will publish. That document will be published. I don't have that exact answer in terms of how often right now, but that'll be published and available for you to see. Someone asked about whether there's some possibility of us looking at what SAU 16 is doing, which I think it was Dr. Akilian that described it in terms of the high school and middle school, where they're doing sort of shortened days, 2 sessions, half the kids in the morning, half the kids in the afternoon. You know, I'll just say, and watch my teammates here, really nothing's off the table for us yet. We are still looking at what model best fits where our data and where the virus seem to lead us. Parents on all changes, so we know exactly. Protocol handbook. I believe the conversations we've had with principals is that protocols will be published and available to principals, or excuse me, available to parents. There will be, so there's a great question here about if I chose kindergarten and looked at remote, will there be some kind of beginning of the year sort of expectations and walking people through the environment they're going to be in? And Dr. Hobbs, I know that's in the plan. You've sort of specified that as the case in any of our courses, any of our grade levels, including kindergarten.
Yeah, there's going to have to be an orientation period at the beginning of the school year, both for reentry for face-to-face, as you said, but also to the expectations and protocols around remote learning. I think, you know, if I'm honest, I think that's also going to involve parents and families with respect to the remote learning. What are the home obligations in that environment?
I lost my place. Dr. Akilian, I want to get you involved here. What are the plans for students' social and emotional health for return?
Sure. So the short answer is this varies by district. However, it's definitely underway. We have administrators and teachers involved in a lot of professional development, week-long classes, responsive classroom, particularly at Northampton. All the buildings are creating social emotional building level teams so that they can determine what to put in place, what to implement with fidelity as far as programs such as for self-regulation, for student mental health and wellness, also for staff mental health and wellness, because we know when staff are healthy with their wellness and their mental health, then they can best implement that for kids. They're working on integrating social and emotional practices into classrooms. And then also for what kind of, you know, like professional development for teachers. So teachers can get together in small groups to share best practice, to brainstorm on how to support kids' needs. And then there's the other supports that we always have in schools with counseling, school counselors, different tiers of support, special education. So these are people who are, this is what they do anyway. However, they're working on how to implement this, their supports remotely and in buildings. So there's more time now and they're capitalizing on that so they can plan for the fall.
Thanks. I want to try a couple more of these and then sort of figure out where we go from here. when do parents need to commit to the choice? Well, we originally said we thought we'd have much more information out and look for that around the 7th of August. It may actually extend beyond that, but we plan to have, you know, this document out for boards for next week. And so yet to be determined, but in that week of the 7th through the 14th, I guess that's probably what we're looking at. So a student that's quarantined for 14 more days could not attend in person. There will not be a remote option for them during the quarantine. No, that's not true. What Dr. Hobbs said earlier is that they would have the remote portion of their regular courses, assuming they were an in-person environment. They would have that environment available to them for assignments, those kinds of things. In certain instances, if we saw that they were going to be have a remote need for longer, we would try to find a way to transition them to the remote academy if that's where they were going to be. But they would, since all courses will have some sort of a remote component, they would have that available to them. Yes to there's a question about recess and students playing together. Yes, but recess means social distancing. I can accompany that with a question about, you know, what will teachers be doing? Yes, they'll be teaching and somewhat in front of the classroom and in different places in the room, but social distancing is required. Masks are required. So there's a whole, you know, learning environment for all of us here. I think I answered the RLA and safe socialization in terms of some situations we might try to create. How will the high school schedule work with so many students? Well, there's a very simple answer for that, right? With the number of students I've tried to say this a number of times tonight, with the number of students we have in the high school, assuming no one goes to a remote option, it won't. It can't. It doesn't work. So would we then, and what I've been trying to say is we've sort of been looking at this in-person and remote model. If we find that we couldn't do an in-person remote model safely, we would have to look at some sort of hybrid model. Our goal has been students, staff in the school 5 days a week safely. If we find that that's not possible, then we have to tell our boards that's not possible and move to some other kind of situation. So class field trips, as I said at the beginning, there will be no field trips through at least the first trimester. We're sort of taking this a trimester by trimester, depending on where we are. Will SAT and PSAT occur? SAT will occur for, is it juniors, Dr. Hobbs, or seniors?
Seniors. I think we can probably put some seniors in there too.
Okay, it will occur as part of the school schedule in the beginning of the year. I can't answer the question about whether the school day stays. Right now, the high school school day is slated for 7:45 to 2:30, but as you've probably discerned from tonight, much of our world is up in the air in terms of reconsidering a number of things to make them work. Face shields would not be used as an alternative. Some face shields will be used, whether they're in the nurse's office or whatever, or in addition to, but not as a substitute for mask. Will Fresh Start program be happening for incoming freshmen this summer? We think so, but we're not sure exactly what it looks like right now. If we have to start remote, will all K-8 students be with their school building teacher during that time? If we have to, oh, geez. Sorry, Jody, I finally got it. If we have to start remote, meaning as a school or a school district, if we have to start remote, yes, we would then, if we were starting remote, we'd have to figure out what remote academy looks like. But right, if we were starting remote, we would probably look very much in terms of the structure of classes like we finished. I think we've answered these questions about if students test positive and how Do they learn? We don't have, there's a question about whether we're hiring more teachers. We don't have the capacity to hire more teachers in our budgets. So we are right now trying to plan for this within the staff that we have and look at being creative with people who are interested in the remote academy or need that kind of adaptation. There will be buses to and from school. We'll be in contact, particularly with people who choose an in-person option about particularly if they said yes, that they still want a bus and given us an address and all that in terms of trying to map out what those routes look like and what that bus ridership would look like. What does a hybrid model look like? The answer to that is yes. It actually looks like a million different things. There are many districts here in Massachusetts, for example, that are using a hybrid, which is 1 week in school, 1 week remote, with another group coming in that second week. It can be every other day. It can be what you're seeing in SAU 90 of 2 days and then 2 other days. It can be a week. There are, the key characteristic of hybrid is that students spend some of their time in person and some of their time remote. David, are competencies clearly published so parents can work with their children or see the competencies?
Yes, they are. They're available through PowerSchool. We can also just literally print out a list of kind of the expectations in a given class. I'm happy to facilitate that as needed or work with buildings to do that.
Thanks, David. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do 2 or 3 more here. There are lots of other great questions. We obviously capture these. So I think what we'll have at our senior staff meeting tomorrow is a conversation about what we do with some of these to at least make sure we've folded them into our documents, because there are just some great questions here. So thank you for that. And so we'll take a look at them and see how we fold them into our end document. But I have to say we really appreciate what you've given us here tonight in terms of your questions and comments, and really just from my perspective, and it's usually Jason who says this. Jason, I'll do it tonight though. I really appreciate the very respectful tone that we're able to maintain with one another about what are clearly have been made into very emotional issues, right? And I know this is difficult, and I'm sorry we're having this conversation, but I really appreciate the level with which you've engaged us in conversation around these topics. It's really, really appreciated. If students leave the country for vacation during the school break, yes, we know that part of the attestation, whether it's online or not, Mr. Farrar, I don't know if you want to jump in here, does require people answering questions and quarantining if they've gone to certain places, correct?
Yeah, so that screening tool will include a question about travel. CDC guidelines, DHHS guidelines have shifted. So, we will certainly update that to align with those guidelines upon the start of the school year. Currently, I believe it's outside of New England, but that's to be determined.
There's a question here about doing the survey and the commitment. I think I mentioned that, but I will mention again that we have over 1,800 people, 1,800 students have been represented on the survey. We have about 2,400 students. So that is an outstanding rate that really gives us some data that we can make some generalizations on, we believe, from there. So no, I don't mean to make it sound like remote learning will be staffed by whoever signs up. That's not the case. So they will be licensed to do whatever they do. They will be people generally who teach those grade levels or whatever. If I made it sound that way, I apologize. That is not at all what it was meant to be. What's the first day of school? I can do that simply. That's the 8th of September for students. And again, the calendar will be coming out. SAT options for seniors. David, do you have, there are dates we can choose from, right? That's how that works?
Yeah, they gave us a window. I don't want to step out in front of the high school guidance department.
Yeah, so there will be a window, and the high school will get to you with that window of when they might be testing. I am really trying. Someone said none of my questions were answered, and I actually thought I'd seen that name earlier, and I apologize if I didn't, but we still have them. And again, we will take a look at them with respect. Oh, I should end here, I guess. So there's a question about, will Zoom calls like this be happening from the individual schools? We're going to meet with principals again on Thursday. They are trying to take all this and really work with it in terms of the specifics that they're building. All of them have plans in one way or another to communicate the specifics of their plans. I know we will do this again. I'm happy to do this to get out as much information as we can. But I think their efforts will vary. Some may do this, and some will do it in written form. I don't want to speak for them and commit them to this type of necessarily this type of model. And I would guess that after, maybe even before next week, I think one of the principals actually sent out some general guidance already. But you'll begin to see more specific guidance as they keep saying to us, as soon as we tell them what the models are. So early next week will be a big time for us. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to stop, because I've done a terrible job of carving into your questions, and thank you all for doing this. Oh, I just see one more that I have to answer. And yes, that plan will be up on our website. Yes, it will be. That'll be one place to access it, and we'll let parents know when it's there. And so to ask you to, again, if you want to send an email, I'm happy to try to get back to you in as much as my day now has capacity. I've been okay at doing that so far, gotten back to parents as they've written to me, and I'm happy to continue to try to do that. And otherwise, we'll try to incorporate some of your questions and our thinking on these specific things into the plan. And I hope you're able to join us for that joint board meeting next week as we talk with the joint board more about the specifics of the plan that will really be derived, as I said earlier, about where our staff is in terms of those requests, where our parents are in terms of the results of those surveys, and then where the virus leads us. Because in the end, that's what we're really responding to, is keeping everyone safe and trying to figure out what school can look like within that type of environment. So I really appreciate you being here, and thanks very much. We'll talk again.